I'm the chair of K-12 appropriations. In the midst of me trying to come up with a budget for our schools, I was told by school districts across the country that they were desperate for funds to deal with COVID. In the midst of all of this, in October of last year, in the height of COVID, and how do we get kids back to school, Brevard Public Schools created a position called the Director of Equity and Diversity. It was not a Director of Equality and Diversity, it was a Director of Equity and Diversity. And for those of you who do not know, equity is a term for equality of outcome, not equality of opportunity. And let me give you a specific example of what a problem it is. I will imagine I was back in high school and why equity doesn't work. When I was in high school, if there was a math competition or if there was a speech and debate competition, I would win. You know why? Because I was pretty good at it when it comes to math and when it comes to talking. No one focused on equity to say, how do we make the kids who aren't as good at math be able to compete with Randy Fine? How do we make them who aren't as good at talking be in speech and debate with Randy Fine? But then when I had to run a race, if I had to run a mile around the track, guess who came in last? That was me. And no one said in the name of equity, because Randy Fine is a slow runner, we will only let him run 1/10 of a mile while the fast kids run 1 mile. This is a position focused on implementing the pretext of critical race theory that we must make everyone equal. Her role, as listed in her job description, is to combat existing quote-unquote systemic racism that we supposedly have in Brevard Public Schools and quote-unquote unconscious bias. All in, between her compensation and consultant fees, we're talking about $200,000 in the midst of COVID that we know of that was spent on implementing critical race theory in Brevard Public Schools. Here's a quote from one of her presentations about how racism is prevalent within our society. In addition to hiring her, Brevard Public Schools paid over $19,000 to someone who ran training called Overcoming Racism. The founder is Michael Kincaid. You saw some of his speaking, some of his commentary when we went through that video. I'll show you a few of the quotes. These are the things that they thought were appropriate for someone to be training in Brevard Public Schools. White America has a deep and thick appetite for black death and violence upon black people. That is someone that Brevard Public Schools thought was a great trainer to come into our school system to do mandatory trainings for principals and guidance counselors. The simple reality is it's likely that no one in your entire bloodline has lifted a single finger in the efforts to progress this country to where it is now. So no one has ever done anything to try to solve these problems. And again, these are just, I'm not going to read you every quote, but he has done trainings on October 15th of last year, June 8th, June 12th, and he just did one this week. $19,000 for these 4 trainings. You can see the slide, and you can see that within the training, one of the things that we pulled out, again, this will all be made available to you, there is critical race theory in the worksheets. We don't know, we have all of the worksheets, we don't know exactly what happened, the trainings were not recorded, but critical race theory and teaching critical race theory was a part of the training that he conducted. These are trainings, we know of 2 trainings. One was a mandatory training for principals, where as a result, they're supposed to go out and create a plan to bring this into our schools next year. Another one was a training for guidance counselors. The training was not mandatory. Going to the day of training was mandatory, and it was one of several sessions that the guidance counselors could choose to go to. So it was a training available at a mandatory training. This is that mental health conference training. This is a slide. Again, it was submitted by someone who was at it, who was very uncomfortable, applying critical race theory to how students are disciplined. Don't talk about implicit bias without talking about structural racism. Again, the notion that every aspect of how we live is imbued with racism. This is my favorite quote that was shown in the training. You can see it here at the bottom. It's on the slide on the right. This is what our Brevard Public School employees were told. This is the policy of the executives who run Brevard Public Schools. This is something they felt guidance counselors and principals needed to know. There is no such thing as a non-racist or race-neutral policy. There's no such thing. Every policy in Brevard Public Schools, not only that, in every institution, in every community, in every nation, is producing or sustaining either racial inequity or equity between racial groups. Everything that is done must be viewed through the lens of racism. There is nothing more un-American than this. This is from the public records request. There's just, again, we're going to give you all of these emails. This talks about the work that is being done. This came from the public records request, that there are workshops to begin the process, to begin an anti-racist organization that operates with an equity lens, and that the next step in this, so again, I want to be clear, we have no evidence today of this actually being taught. This is all training at present. However, the next step is getting it into our curriculum and instructional practices. That is the next step. And that's why we're here today, to nip this in the bud before it actually gets there. Interestingly, one of the emails, principals say, I'm uncomfortable. Why do I have to go to this training? I actually have to teach students. Little known fact, 3rd grade reading scores in Brevard County, 3rd grade competency has had the largest decline in history over the same time that Brevard County thought it was a good idea to focus on critical race theory. We actually dropped hugely. It's because of COVID. Students weren't getting educated, so our 3rd grade reading scores went down. But instead of focusing on that, principals say, look, I'm not really, I don't see the need. The person who's in charge of secondary education in Brevard County wrote back, thanks. The irony is that to end racism, it lies in the hands of the privileged. There is far more racism at Satellite High School than Palm Bay High School, but they think it is an issue for those schools. We have senior executives in Brevard Public Schools claiming that some of our schools, Satellite High, because it's a privileged beachside school, has a racism problem. I would like to know what data actually suggests that is the case. Okay, I think that's it. Again, we're going to make this and a whole lot more material available for you all to see. I didn't want to show it all. I just wanted to show the highlights. What I'd like to now is I'd like to turn it over for just a minute to Lindsay with Moms for Liberty, who's going to say a few words, and then we'll have probably the most interesting Ashley, sorry, I got that wrong. My apologies. Then we're going to have the most interesting speaker, much more interesting than me, come on up here. So sorry, you've got to deal with the court.
Thank you, Representative Fine, for holding this press conference. We really appreciate it, allowing Moms for Liberty to share what we've found so far, and we just feel like we're scratching the surface. Kind of what we've suspected all along, but we had to really dig hard to find this information. Parents have been shut out of the schools. Our concerns have been downplayed when we brought up CRT in the past with board members or administrators. And we've been lied to, just clearly from the evidence that we have. So we felt it was important that parents know this, that we shine a light on what is coming down from the upper echelon of BPS schools, so that parents can make informed decisions. Parents may be okay with this, parents may not be okay with this. I as a parent am not okay with a lot of what I'm seeing. So I want to be able to make that informed decision for what my child is exposed to, and age appropriately as well. We are unequivocally against racism in all of its forms and will oppose any doctrine, including CRT, that seeks to divide us. So I just want to thank again Randy Fine for allowing us to come here today and show what we have. We felt that this was a necessary step to make sure we do not continue what's happening in our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, interestingly, when you announce you're going to do something on this, sometimes people come over the transom. And yesterday afternoon, as we were preparing for today, a former teacher at Brevard Public Schools named Anna Ryan reached out. I'm going to let Anna tell her story, but what I want you to know before I do that is I had never spoken to Anna until about 10:30 this morning, when I said, come over, tell us your story, and if you'd like to tell it. This is fundamentally what we're doing here is grassroots. These are people speaking up and coming on their own out of the blue. So Anna, as a former teacher in Brevard Public Schools, is probably the best testimony we can share about where critical race theory is being shown up in our schools. So Anna, if you'd like to come up and say a few words, and then I'll answer any questions that people have.
Oh, it's
Not going to come this way.
yeah.
Thank you, Representative Fine, for having me here today. My name is, good morning, my name is Anna Ryan, and until recently I worked as a community education coordinator, program coordinator in the adult education program under Brevard County Schools. Just want to say that I love God, I love people, and I love the principles that our country was founded on, which is freedom and liberty. I resigned from my position less than 2 months ago due to ongoing mandatory critical race theory trainings, or what I call programming sessions. I resigned because when I let my supervisor know that I was uncomfortable after a while, that I would need to be excused from the next required discussions, I was reprimanded. Instead of giving she gave me no type of concern for my values, my beliefs, or where I was coming from. So I was told that I was insubordinate if I was going to not want to participate regardless of what I felt. That was given zero consideration. And so that day for me, that just drew the line. And so I typed up my resignation letter for that day to end, it was mid-April, the end of my contract. So I did want to stay for the end of my contract. However, within the next couple of weeks, all hell seemed to be broke loose, and I was accused of things I did not do. And so I know that they will probably try to make me out to be some type of disgruntled teacher, but please know that is not the case. I did stand up for what was right and what I believed in. I also put that what happened was a violation of my civil rights and an assault on the very principles our country was founded on. It was a demoralizing experience for me. Some red flags came up during the trainings before all of this happened, and that's when I did some research, and I learned that even though we were not being told that these trainings were critical race theory, I learned that that is what this was, and that is when I learned that it was, in fact, to my surprise, actually rooted in Marxism and critical theory, which is a Marxist ideology. So when I found this out, I was even more floored, of course, and which led to me resigning. So the last thing I just want to say is that how hypocritical is it that critical race theory, in its very concepts, claims to, it pretends that it stands for justice, when in fact, it stands for anything but justice. When it pretends to be all about equality. A lot of these trainings disguise what it is. It's called equity and social justice, but these are mandatory trainings. We are not given, as an employee, people that have bills to pay, you have no say in what you are the information that you are being forced to take in. And the teachers or the administrators, they know that the teachers, many of them, most of them, do not know what critical race theory even is. And I didn't, but I looked it up. People are worried about feeding their families, day-to-day priorities, and keeping their jobs. So, and they know this. And when I voiced my concern, when I resigned, I was told, well, we won't get any buy-in if we tell them. I said, well, why don't you just say this is critical race theory here that we're teaching? This is education. And she says, well, then we won't get any buy-in. So they're admitting that they're hiding it. I don't know why it's going on, but thank you for allowing me to speak today. And God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll wrap up. I just want to say, again, Ms. Ryan may have seen training that we didn't share here. I do not believe, is the source of any of the material that I shared. The material I shared relates to guidance counselors and principals, so obviously there's even more than we are aware of today. Last thing I'll say is people have asked why we're doing this now. I actually asked the Moms for Liberty why we need to get this out right now, and the reason is parents are making their decisions about how they're going to educate their children next year. Because of the bill that I passed, HB 7045, more parents in the state of Florida have more options to educate their children than ever before. A family of 4 making $100,000 a year of less can now get a voucher to send their child to private school if they are not willing to subject themselves to these sorts of things. So parents are making these decisions right now. We wanted to get this out there, to put pressure on the school district to cut this off now before it actually ends up in teaching, but moreover to make sure parents know what's going on, because they're not being told the truth about what's going on, as you saw at the beginning of that video presentation. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any. Yes?
What do these emails say about the culture of the BPS administration?
What do these emails say about the culture of the BPS administration? Well, I've read a lot of them, and I will tell you at the senior level of administrations, there's unquestionably radical leftist wokeism. When people start to talk about anti-racist this and anti-racist that and privilege, and again, when you have the person who's responsible for secondary education in Brevard County refer to Satellite High as a racist school, I'm telling you, my child does not go to Satellite High. I'd be pretty angry if I knew that they're talking about my school like that you need this critical race theory the most because you're a more racist school than, say, Palm Bay High. I think it says something about how some of these people look at their students and look at the parents that go there. Yes?
Have you discussed any of these materials that you've shown today with school district leaders, Dr. Mullins or anything? Have you sought an explanation for these materials?
So I asked the Moms for Liberty folks this when they came to me on Monday, and they said, look, we have raised this repeatedly, and what we get is we get gaslit. It's not happening, it's not happening, it's not happening. I had some informal discussions yesterday about it, and you know, you'll see what their response is, but I think bringing these things to light so the public can see it, I think is important. What is done about it, I think there's no harm in putting sunlight on these kinds of things, and we will see how they go about it. But keep in mind, the highest levels of the school board had to make the decision that in the midst of COVID, this is what got me to do this, irrespective of the slides. I was told day after day after day in the fall how we had no money, we had no money, we had no money. In the midst of all of this, in the midst of our kids getting substandard educations, not necessarily because of anyone's fault, because of COVID. No question this last year wasn't what we seek. In the midst of all of this, this was the priority. A director whose job it is to hire people who say all white people lust for the death of black people. That is what we thought was the priority in the midst of COVID. And when I'm being told there's no money to have to run our education, but there's $200,000 for a director of equity and inclusion, and this person who you heard talk about training, then I knew there was a problem. And that's why I needed to bring it out. But that decision was made at the highest levels. Someone up there thought this was a good idea. Any other questions? Yes?
If the government says that this can't be taught within the school, why do you think this is being used in training?
That's a great question. So many of you know that Governor DeSantis and Commissioner Corcoran, both of whom are my friends, just about a week ago passed a rule at the Department of Education saying this cannot be taught in the classroom. But it cannot be taught. It does not mean it cannot be trained. It does not mean it cannot be indoctrinated. And I think part of the reason it is going on is you've had the opponents of the governor and the commissioner say, we don't need to do this. This is a solution in search of a problem. They stood up and they gaslit the public by claiming it wasn't going on. Part of what is important here is to show that this is going on. But one of the trainings, the one that I think happened 2 days ago, happened after the governor had after the Board of Education signed that. So clearly the intent is not to stop. And so I think bringing this to light is very important. But your question is a fair one. It is not allowed to teach this in classrooms. But unfortunately, Brevard Public Schools is continuing to do what it is that they wish to do.
Would you put into words why you believe that the critical race theory is un-American?
Because critical race theory is racist. Martin Luther King said that we look at people because of who they are, the content of their character. You don't look at someone who's white and make conclusions about them because of it. You don't look at someone who's black and make conclusions of it. You know, white people different. I'm a third generation American whose family came from Russia. My aide, who's not here, Anna Budko, just became an American 2 months ago. Everyone has their own unique story, and the foundation of critical race theory is to say you are based on what you look, how you look. You're black, you must have these issues that you're faced with. You're white, you must lust for the death of black people, or whatever this person said. It is repulsive, it is anti-American, and it is as racist as it gets. And we have to stand up and say to our kids, this is not how we want you to look. We should not care what someone's background is. We should care about their talents and their innate creativity, not how they look. Yeah.
Representative Fine,
Two more, yes.
do you think there's any place for the, I haven't seen these documents, obviously in the same detail
Sure.
that any of you have at this point, but do you think there's any place for a discussion of race? And I'm not talking about critical race theory. I'm talking about just a discussion of race that exists in terms of training, in terms of even education.
I think what there is a place for is the teaching of our history. And I think that is what there is a place for. That America made a huge mistake that when we were created. We're the greatest country in the history of the world, but we allowed our Constitution to say black people only counting for 3/5 of a person. That is something that people should be taught. But then they should also be taught that in the 1860s, hundreds of thousands of Americans died to fix that mistake, that we corrected our mistake. We should teach our history, but we should not teach children that people are innately good or bad or racist. And that critical race theory is not about teaching history. History is great. We need to teach history. Critical race theory is about indoctrination of a political ideology that is wrong, is Marxist, is racist, and is un-American. Last question.
So I was just gonna ask, these pretty much all seem to be examples of staff training, and it seems like in the past you've been mostly concerned with examples of educating children. So why are you so concerned with these examples that seem to all be about educating the staff? Does
Sure.
that make sense?
Sure. No, I've got it. I'm trying to think of how to say this. Because you can't go to the kids first. Hitler didn't create the Hitler Youth directly. He brainwashed the parents. He brainwashed the adults first, and they created the Hitler Youth. The way that you indoctrinate our children is by indoctrinating those who teach our children. This all started in October of last year. These principals were told, have a plan ready to go for next year for how you're going to bring it to our schools. They are en route to do exactly what it is that you just asked for. That is the plan. And we showed you the slide where they're talking about how you're going to bring this into your curriculum and your instructional materials. So, and there may be more that we don't know. I want to be clear, we don't know everything, and hopefully this raises questions. But that is why. You start with the adults that are in charge. That is how it translates to the children. Well, look, I want to thank the Moms for Liberty for bringing this to me. I want to thank Ms. Ryan for having the courage to come and share her story. And she proves exactly what we're talking about. And I want to thank all of you for coming and covering this today. So thank you, everybody, for being here.